Today, as we continue to reimagine me and we, spirituality in the world, we're moving toward what is mine to do. And you know that I have shamelessly stolen this from Tracy Brown. So I'm giving this a plug to Tracy Brown. She has a fabulous Facebook page, What is Mine to Do? Lots of fabulous information, provocative questions, and an opportunity to think about it over and over and over again. So I do highly recommend that you participate in that. And it's a provocative question. What is mine to do? What is ours to do as spiritual beings? What is mine to do as a spiritual being having a human experience, living this philosophy to the best of our ability, right, and moving in the world? Now, I will tell you that this was a giant conversation when I was in ministerial training. There was, for whatever reason, there was a conversation that came up about the topic, the Christian biblical phrase, I'm my brother's keeper. And we had a huge conversation about it. That conversation probably lasted a year and a half while I was in ministerial school. And we were all over the place. Am I my brother's keeper? And really trying to find our way through from a spiritual point of view, particularly from the New Thought Science of Mind spiritual point of view, when so many of us were raised in a very Christian point of view, and watched the people that we loved and cared about take that up either in a martyred, sacrificial way, like I'm going to give up my life for yours, I'm going to give up what I need for what you need. We saw that in our families, and we saw that in lots of places. If you've ever read Charles Dickens' Bleak House, that's one of the things that he's bringing to light. This woman who goes around getting alms for people who live overseas while her children are barefoot and in rags and don't have enough food. And that always looking to be pious and holy, to be righteous. I'm my brother's keeper, I'm doing the good work, and I'll be rewarded somewhere, right? Or I'm my brother's keeper, and I'm going to tell him what to do and how to live, right? Yeah, we're having a little of that going on in our country today, especially around women. And so, don't even get me started. And so, be my brother's keeper can be, I know better for you than you know for yourself. Right? And if you would only do what I said, or do what I told you, or do how I believe you should do it, which will keep you safe or secure or holy or whatever it is. And so it was very interesting that at the time, we collectively came to the understanding that no, we are not our brother's keeper. And I will tell you that that was a ubiquitous thought in New Thought in the Science of Mind. If you'll recall our conversation last week about spiral dynamics, Science of Mind and New Thought grew up in what we call the orange meme, which is the corrective to what I just said, which is no, you're not my keeper. I'm my keeper. I get to say about my life. And I'm going to also take care of myself. And of course, then what happens, as we talked last week, is that goes too far. And then I'm only taking care of myself. And I don't really care about what's happening to you because, well, I'm taking care of myself. Why aren't you? Yeah. And we hear that, in our New Thought and in Science of Mind. What's in your consciousness? Why did you attract that? Haven't you healed it? What are you triggered about? What's the problem in your consciousness? Because we've been evolving. We've been growing, right? Our philosophy, our understanding of our philosophy, the way in which we take it up, we too have been evolving and growing, seeking to mature the way in which we understand as our culture has shifted and changed, as we have seen life over the last 100 years as it has evolved. So So once again today, I am focusing on this idea of me and we. It's not just a move from me to we, it's a recognition that we live in the and. Me and we. This is the forever tension. My needs and the needs of the group. My sense of myself as an individual and what we need as a collective. How I see you and your life and the group and the community, right? And how we see ourselves and what our own needs are. We often think of ourselves as a focus group of one, and the way in which our focus group sees the world is obviously correct, right? It's obviously the correct way because we've done our study. We've listened to our focus group of one. We've studied it carefully, right? And so this idea that we live in the and, the me and we, that these two things are not mutually exclusive, but the very real and necessary acknowledgement that they are sometimes in tension. Just think about it in your own personal life. Me and then the we that is my partnership. Or me and then the we that is my family and children and what the children need and what the grandparents need, and right? And you can draw that circle bigger and bigger. Me in my own job, and we, what my team needs, what my company decides. We're always in this engagement. And what we have done in the past is we've fallen all the way over into one side or the other. It's all about me, or it's all about the group. And as we are learning to grow up in a grown-up spirituality, right, we recognize that both of these things are simultaneously true. Now, I said this last week, and I'm going to say it again. I don't really have any answers for you. I can only share with you my journey through all of this, because I will tell you that's where it started many more years ago than I care to say out loud. That's where it started in our ministerial training. And there was a lot of agreement about that. And we spent a lot of time supporting that agreement by saying our spirituality teaches us to fish. If we keep only giving somebody a fish, they're never going to learn to fish for themselves. And there is some deep truth to that. But there's also an opportunity to recognize that sometimes people need a fish, right? Sometimes people need a helping hand. Sometimes people need something. Sometimes there is an opportunity for that leg up, for that support. And, notice, and we seek to teach people to fish. These things are not mutually exclusive. What we have to recognize and pay attention to is our inner awareness of these things. So, as I told you last week, I'm reading this book called The Pivot, and where I'm reading this chapter on reflection, and he talks about mirror work. And he talks about the fact that so much of the work that we do in the world is based on systems and an understanding of a framework of this me and we. And we did that last week, right? I gave you a couple of frameworks, frames, ways of thinking about and approaching and holding what's going on. But the only problem with that is that is an external view. It's always about the condition, and it's about what needs to be done, and it's about the circumstances, which is not bad. Remember, this talk is about the and. It is not bad. We actually have to do those things. And we also have to reflect on what's true for us. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? What's going on inside us? How are we holding the things that are going on in the world? How are we impacted by them? What kind of pain might we be experiencing, which then also allows us to think about or have compassion for the pain that other people might be experiencing. And so this opportunity to do reflection becomes really important. How do I know what's needed? How do I know what's mine to do? How do I know that? I think that's right. Isn't that the question that plagues us? What can I do? What should I do? What's needed? What's necessary? What is mine to do with all of this? Is it just to pray? Is it just to work? Is it just to march? Is it just to create not-for-profits? Is it just to... What is mine to do? Is it just to have my life be successful? And to answer that question requires reflection. It requires a going within, a standing in front of the mirror of our own consciousness and feeling what's going on within us, listening to what's going on in our brains, in our conscious and subconscious minds, and to see what might be revealed there. How do I know what's needed? So an opening for me came over a course of a number of years when what I became aware of is that I was solely personally focused on any time I did something, engaged with someone, or acted in the world, I was solely focused on my intention, right? Isn't that what we teach? My intention. What's my intention? Hold the intention, be about your intention, create your own reality, right? And I took that into everything. What's my intention? And if my intention is good and you take it poorly, this is not my responsibility, right? Because I was clean. I was holding my intention. I was being very clear about what I was seeking to do, and right, and we come from that place of taking responsibility for our intention, right? And we've learned to take responsibility for being compassionate, and take responsibility for telling truth with kindness, and taking responsibility for seeing the truth, and all of these kinds of things. And we stand in that place of intention. And during this whole time, I also heard that phrase, which I'm sure you've all heard, if you want to know how another person is feeling, walk a mile in their moccasins, right? Walk a mile in their moccasins. Except that it has occurred to me over the last, number of years, is that I really can't walk in anybody else's moccasins. Because I don't have their experience. I can't actually walk in the moccasin of a black person. I can imagine, I can try to see, but I can't actually walk in those moccasins. I have a different experience. Remember that focus group of one? And what I noticed was that when trying to walk in somebody else's moccasins didn't agree or didn't, I don't want to say that, that's not quite the right word. When walking in somebody else's moccasins was too hard or not available to me, the only place I had to go was my focus group of one, right? And, well, this is how I experience it. So, therefore, that must be what the other person is experiencing. Or, I don't know why they're experiencing that, because I only have my own experience. Does this make sense to you? Right? And that's when I learned that not only do we have to pay attention to intent, we have to pay attention to impact. Right? My intention can be very clean and pure and seriously good and high-minded and spiritual, but I also have to pay attention to the impact. And the way that I walk in someone else's moccasins is I believe them when they tell me their experience. I don't know why it took me so long to figure that out. It was like, feels like the blinding flash of the obvious, right? Somebody is telling me their experience, whether it's LGBT or trans or a woman or black or an immigrant or a child or an elder, and they're telling the experience and they're telling their story. Why would I not believe them? I believe my focus group of one because I know what I've experienced. So maybe I can't walk in their moccasins But I can believe them when they tell me what it's like for them to walk in those moccasins. You see, I have moccasins of my own that I walk in that many of you have probably never confronted, ever in your life. Maybe some of you have. In 7th and 8th grade, when I was in 7th and 8th grade, we began studying history in a different way. Woo. And in both 7th and 8th grade, they would bring in film strips, and they would bring in films of the liberation of the camps in Germany of the Holocaust. Well, you have to understand, I grew up on those stories. I grew up on my mother's stories of the complete bafflement of what was happening, that people on her street were simply disappearing, that they had no idea what was going on, that their door would get pounded on. We're watching you. Your daughter doesn't wear the Nazi youth in uniform. We're watching you. I grew up on those stories. And when we started watching those films, I would find myself curled up in a fetal position under my desk. They would send me to the nurse. Ultimately, my mother had to write a note. Please excuse Petra when you're going to show this kind of a film. She simply can't bear it. Empathetic, maybe in the DNA of my German family, maybe passed down from my parents, right? I don't know. I don't know why I was crippled by those moments. And why our inhumanity to each other, this is why it affects me so much. All I can do is tell you that's my story. That is how it affects me. I will forever work toward our humanity towards each other because of it. And all you can do is believe me, unless you've walked that same particular road. Do you see? And so we have to understand that life is having an impact, and that we are having impacts when we are unconsciously engaged in life, when we are not paying attention to the impact of our words, to the impact of our thoughts. If we want to know what's needed, we need to ask and listen and believe that what somebody is telling us is actually their experience, and not always relate it to the focus group of one that we ourselves are. We don't need to understand. What we have to do is believe and respect what this person is telling us, their experience. So intent and impact have to do with paying attention. We always have to pay attention to our intent, always, in everything, thought, word, and deed. We have to also learn how to pay attention. Let me speak for myself, as Kirby so beautifully sung. I loved what you said. We need to do this, and I'm still learning, right? I'm still learning to pay as much attention to the impact that I'm having, and not just purely the intent. Do you see? The intent is me, my side, my part. The impact is the we. And we have to stand in the and. And in our spirituality, we take responsibility, right? A cornerstone, an absolute cornerstone of our spirituality is radical responsibility. Radical responsibility, which means that I take responsibility for my intent and I take responsibility for my impact. I learned this in the conversations over the last few years about how many people, well-meaning white people, spiritual people, who will say, I don't see color. No, I've said it myself. I don't see color. Very clear intent. What I mean by that is nothing about the way I behave towards you is impacted by the color of your skin. That's what I mean by it. But what I say is I don't see color. Well, the impact for many people of color is you don't see me. How can you not see that I'm black? That would be like saying you look at me and you don't see a blonde or you don't see a woman, which is silly. Of course we see that. Well, right? But the impact of the way something is said, regardless of how we mean it, the intent is pure, but the impact doesn't land. Do you see? These are some of these powerful and subtle ways in which we have to take responsibility for not only our intent, but also the impact. The impact we have when we speak, the impact we have when we think. Are we looking for the good? Are we thinking about humanity is going to turn this around? Are we watching for the good that people are doing in terms of women and racism and LGBT and immigration and the environment and poverty and homelessness? Are we going to see all of that? Or are we going to focus on how bad it is, how awful it is, how terrible it is, how once again, over and over and over again, it's the same and it's never going to be any different? Do you see? That has an impact on race consciousness, on the consciousness of the human race. And paying attention to the impact that we have in our actions, in everything, from the way in which we organize our lives, the choices that we make, the way in which we organize our organizations, the way in which we do anything. So this idea that reflection, that the opportunity for reflection isn't just about these external systems and what's needed to be changed in systemic racism and environment and all of these things, but is also to reflect on this internal reflection. Am I being responsible for my impact? So another thing that happened to me along the way of all of this is I remember at one point, this is quite a number of years ago, I can't remember the environmental moment. It might have been the Exxon Valdez oil spill. I remember being just horrified and so angry and in tears and just really passionately talking about this with someone. And the person turned and looked at me and said, well, wow, why are you so triggered by this? What happened in your childhood that you would be so triggered by this? I cannot actually say on a Sunday morning how I responded to that statement. We have a tendency to pathologize our own responses to what's going on. When we are impacted by these things, we have a tendency to pathologize them. Well, what's wrong with me? Well, why can't I just look for the good and praise it? Well, why am I angry? Why am I grieving over these things? I should be able to just let it go. The problem is we've let it go for too long, haven't we? We've just let it go. And no, I'm not triggered. No, this is actually unacceptable. It is actually unacceptable. There's many, many, many things that are actually unacceptable to the forward movement of our planet and humanity and our humane way, human being way of being with each other. And so we should not pathologize our responses at the way in which things that are going on in the world are impacting us. We should not pathologize them nor seek to avoid the pain they cause. Now, we had a big conversation this morning in the Science Mind class about suffering. Okay, well, we can't do is go suffering about it. Ain't it awful, it's never going to be this way. And look at there they are again, blah, 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 right? That just keeps us going. But to experience our grief, which is our feeling of separation and division, which is very real, and it's the opposite of love. Grief, we have grief because we love humanity so much. We have grief because we love the planet so much. And when we feel divided And when we feel separate, that causes us to feel out of our love, to feel grief. And it is an appropriate response. When we feel depressed or hopeless, this is not an inappropriate response when we feel the impact of situations and circumstances in our life that is impacting our joy, our ability to be ourselves, for a black man to walk comfortably down the street, for a woman, a trans woman, to feel as though she's safe wherever she goes, to recognize that our grandchildren to the 7th generation, they deserve a planet that is healthy and whole, right? And when that joy is impacted, do you see, when we feel hopeless and depressed, this is not an inappropriate thing. It is alerting us to the impact. Does that make sense to you? It's alerting us to the impact, right? So we're not only taking responsibility for the impact we're having, but we begin to take responsibility for the fact that we are aware that we are being impacted. And that's not bad and wrong. It is a wake-up call. It's a wake-up call to take responsibility. Anger is simply the other side of the inability to express the deep, unique, and precious being that each one of us is. And when that boundary is violated or that is taken away, we become angry. And that is not inappropriate. Of course, what you do with your grief, depression, and anger, that's where we take responsibility of the intent and impact, right? Of what we're doing with it. But to experience it, right, that's the reflection piece that he talks about. And to take the time to reflect on it is so critical. We get access to our hindsight. How did we get here? Not like, ain't it awful and it's always going to be this way. But hindsight tells us what is going on. Foresight allows us to dream of how it can be, which is what we are so very, very, very good at and should never abandon. And he says the third thing out of that, the and between foresight and hindsight, is insight. What's mine to do? Not to abandon hindsight, not to become Pollyannish about foresight, to be fully in paying attention and responsible for how we're engaging with both, brings us to the and of insight. And then we begin to be able to take responsibility for what's mine to do. The last thing I would say about all of, you know, I'm just musing up here, right? I'm just sharing my process. I hope to God it's helpful to somebody. And the story obviously is not over. We're all working on it. I'm certainly working on it. The other thing I've come to realize, surprise, surprise, we're all different. Hello, right? We're all different. And one of the things we do here at CSLDallas with our staff and leadership is we do an assessment called HBDI. I'm not even going to try to say something brain dominance index. Herman's brain dominance index, and it's about thinking styles, right? Not unlike the Myers-Briggs, which is about personality and the ways you've learned to show up. It's about thinking styles, and that we actually have innate thinking styles. We can learn other thinking styles, but we have innate ways of being in the world that are native to who we are. So some of us are very conceptual. We'd like to talk about the big ideas. Some of us are more strategic. What is the purpose? Others of us are very tactical. Now, how are we going to do it? And then others of us are, but what about the people? What about what about the people? Are they coming? Are they going to be good? What about the people, right? And so we have these four thinking styles. What's mine to do, and this whole concept of being my brother's keeper also rests upon our way of being in the world. So because I tend to be a conceptual and strategic thinker, I'm going to think about what impact can I make that has the largest systemic impact, just even my own personal life. Because that's how I think about things. Other people might think, whose hand can I hold? Who can I help make sure that they have food? Somebody else might think, what program am I going to put together that's really going to be tactically engaged in handling these issues? You want to know somebody who's doing that? Armando with the cardboard project, right? Tactics about how to get homeless people jobs through the digital age. Great example, right? And what we do, at least what I do, is I judge my inside against your outside, and if I see and feel that mine to do and to be my brother's keeper is to hold somebody's hand and make sure they have a fish, do you see I'm not built that way. I'm built a different way. And what I trust is that there are people who are built that way, and they're doing that, and I want to support that. But I have to take responsibility for what's mine to do. You have to take responsibility. We collectively have to take responsibility for what's ours to do, individually and collectively. So I've been pondering this, the environment, and all of that has been important to me since the 70s. So a year ago, I started thinking about buying an EV, an electric vehicle. Ooh, man, they're expensive. Whew. And in the last, 6 months, right, with everything going on, used cars have gone up by almost 20%. And I watched all the vehicles that I was thinking about being interested in, I watched them come across my feed, at $4,000 or $5,000 over market price. I was like, yeah, not so much, not so much. Until Monday of this week, the car that I wanted, the 2015 Nissan Leaf, little commuter car, 84 miles to the charge, right? Back and forth and back and forth and back and forth. You know how many times I can go back and forth to the center on 84-mile charge? It's fabulous. I've calculated it. And it came across, and it was at fair market value, no upcharge, nothing. I went in at 8:45, and at 1:15 I walked out with a new-to-me electric vehicle. And yes, thank you. And they said, do you have a trade-in? And I said, yes, that BMW convertible out there. And that's what the guy said. What? What's wrong with it? At that moment, I'm sorry to say, I didn't tell the truth. What I said was, well, it's gas. That's what's wrong with it. Not only that, it's premium gas. Oh, he said, oh, okay. So, they gave me a fabulous trade-in. I was, almost a straight across the board trade. And hang on, I want to tell you this story. So we got into the finance office, and the salesman and the finance guy, and we were, working out the deal, and and I couldn't stand the fact that I didn't say, I'm buying an electric vehicle because I want to make my carbon footprint smaller. Because I want to take responsibility for my part, and these are the kinds of things that matter to me, that I can do, that have an impact. And so I said that. Well, that the batteries are a big landfill problem, and they don't really blah, 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 and blah. And I got exactly the response, right, that I had tried to avoid by saying it was gas. And wouldn't you know, out of all that that I got back, I said, well, and it costs $70 to fill it up. Oh, he said, well, that makes sense. And so I sold my passion out. And I felt badly about it. So I'm not going to do that anymore. And every time somebody tries to give me a plastic bag, I say, no, here's the bag that I came in with, save the planet. They snicker a lot less today than they did 10 years ago when I started saying that. And now I start getting a few people here and there saying, good for you. More of us should be doing that. right? Each one of us finds our things. We have to find our things, whatever it is, right? So I pay carbon offsets every time I get on the airplane because I refuse not to fly and travel. But I have to take responsibility for the impact that has. Do you see? And I have to pay out of my pocket for the impact that that has because I'm not willing to give up flying. Choices, right? So all of these things, I've learned to vote carefully in every election. We've developed a leadership lab here at CSLDallas to really begin to ponder this idea of intent and impact here at CSLDallas for our staff, our practitioners, and our core. We're starting with facing racism. And we're hoping that as we go through this process, we'll learn to be a little more careful, that's not the word I want, a little more aware of intention and impact and take responsibility for it. That is, after all, what we teach. So what I learned for myself is that there are certain things that I'm passionate about. And if I don't act on those, I sell out my passion. There are certain things that you're passionate about. And when you act on those, you are contributing not only your intention, but you are contributing to the healing of the impact that things are having on others. And you are taking responsibility for the way that things are impacting you and saying, this is what I can do. And my intention is, with my spiritual mind treatment and with this work and the work we're doing here at CSLDallas, my intention is that we heal humanity and we heal our planet. And if I can say it on Sunday morning, that we get our shit together. Yeah. So, those are my thoughts and sharings, because I want to look this little person in the eye and say, I did my part. CSLDallas, we did our part to the best of our ability. And then we can say that we are transforming lives, not just in the me, but also in the we. I love you so much. Thank you for listening.